My name is Carol, I'm 68 years old, and I discovered my daughter-in-law was trying to sell my own grandchildren. Before I tell you how a simple trip to the dry cleaners led to me fighting for their lives and taking back my family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The bell above the door of Henderson's Cleaners chimed softly, just as it had 1,000 times before. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon in Maple Creek, Ohio, and the air smelled of autumn leaves and hot steam. I was just there for a simple errand, picking up a wool coat for my daughter-in-law Jessica. "Afternoon, Carol," Mr. Henderson said from behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He'd known my family for 40 years. He'd cleaned my husband Frank's suits, my son David's prom tuxedo, and now my grandchildren's tiny church clothes. "Hi, Bill," I smiled, handing him the little yellow ticket. "Just picking up for Jessica." He nodded, but instead of his usual cheerful chat, a strange look crossed his face. He glanced towards the front window, then back at me. He took the ticket and disappeared into the back, the racks of clothes rattling on their tracks. He was moving slower than usual, and when he returned with Jessica's coat, pristine in its clear plastic bag, he didn't hand it to me. He held it tight. "Carol," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "can you step into the back with me for a moment?" A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. "Is something wrong with the coat?" "No, not the coat," he said, his eyes darting around the empty shop again. He nudged his head towards the curtained-off back room. "Please. It's important." I followed him behind the curtain, into the small cluttered space filled with the hum of machinery and the scent of laundry soap. He laid the coat on a folding table and then reached into his own pocket. He pulled out a small Ziploc bag. My heart gave a little flutter of unease. "I check all the pockets before cleaning, you know that," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "Standard procedure. Usually it's just old receipts, a lipstick. But I found this in her pocket." He pushed the bag across the table. My eyes focused on what was inside. There were two things. The first was a folded piece of paper, a bank transfer confirmation. I had to squint to read the number, and when I did, the air left my lungs. $2 million. The amount was so staggering it didn't even seem real. But it was the second item that made my blood run cold. It was a small wallet-sized photo of my sweet Emily and Liam, taken at the park just last month. They were laughing, their faces full of sunshine and innocence. But someone had taken a thick, red marker and drawn a crude, angry circle around each of their smiling faces. Not a heart. Not a playful doodle. A circle. Like a target. "Bill. What is this?" I stammered, my hand flying to my mouth. Mr. Henderson leaned in closer, his face pale. "I don't know, Carol. But that's not all." He looked me dead in the eye, his voice dropping to a raw, urgent whisper that I will never forget. "You have to get those children out of here. Take them and leave Maple Creek. Don't pack, don't make a scene. Just go. And do it before sunrise." To understand how I got to that horrifying moment, you have to understand my life before it all fell apart. I'm a simple woman. After my dear husband Frank passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, my world became very small, and I liked it that way. My world was my son David and his two precious children. 7-year-old Emily, who loved to draw pictures of our family, and 4-year-old Liam, who carried a little plastic dinosaur everywhere he went. They were my reason for getting up in the morning. David is a good man just like his father. He's a contractor, works hard, and loves his kids more than anything. When he brought Jessica home 10 years ago, I thought she was perfect. She was pretty shy and seemed to adore him. For years, she was the daughter I never had. But things started to change about 2 years ago, right after David's construction business hit a rough patch. He never lost the business, but money was tight for a while. That's when Jessica started acting different. She started buying expensive handbags and shoes, things I knew were far beyond their budget, claiming she was making good money with some online freelance marketing she did from home. She was always vague about it. Her phone, which used to be tossed casually on the counter, was now always in her hand, clutched tight, the screen angled away from everyone. The warmth she once had slowly chilled into a polite distance. Last Christmas, I found a framed photo of me and Frank from our wedding day tossed in a donation box in the garage. When I asked Jessica about it, my voice shaking, she just shrugged. Oh, sorry, Carol. It must have fallen in there while I was cleaning. It's an old picture anyway. She didn't even look me in the eye. The casual cruelty of it stung more than she could ever know. I tried to tell myself I was being a paranoid old woman. I didn't want to cause trouble in my son's marriage. So I stayed quiet. I made excuses for her. I told myself she was just stressed. But now, standing in the back of Henderson's cleaners, the chemical smell of the soap burning my nostrils, I knew I hadn't been paranoid at all. I had been a fool. My breath hitched in my throat. The plastic bag crinkled in my white-knuckled grip. $2 million. And 2 red circles. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. Get them out before sunrise. In that instant, every doubt, every excuse I had ever made for Jessica, evaporated like smoke. There was only one thing left to do. I stumbled out of the dry cleaners, the plastic-wrapped coat in one arm, the Ziploc bag clutched in my hand like a venomous snake. The cheerful afternoon sun felt like a spotlight, and every passing car seemed to slow down, its occupants staring at the guilty secret I was carrying. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The 10-minute drive home felt like an eternity. I drove on autopilot, my mind a churning vortex of disbelief and raw primal fear. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I had to remind myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. The house was quiet when I walked in, the silence almost screaming at me. Emily and Liam were in the living room, building a lopsided tower of colorful blocks. Emily looked up and gave me a sunny smile that nearly broke my heart in two. Grandma, look, we made a castle for you. You can be the queen. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Her sweet, innocent face. Liam's little head bent in concentration over a blue block, his tongue sticking out just a little. The red circles from the photograph burned behind my eyes, an obscene graffiti scrawled over their beautiful lives. I forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. It's beautiful, sweetie. The most beautiful castle I've ever seen. I knelt and hugged them both, burying my face in their hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. I held on for a second too long, trying to absorb their purity, trying to build a wall around them with my love. Just then my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. My whole body went rigid. A text from Jessica. My hand shook as I picked it up. Hey, got pulled into a last-minute client meeting. Looks like it's going to be a late one. Can you handle the kids for dinner and bedtime? Tax love you. The casual, breezy tone of the message, the cheerful emoji at the end, sent a wave of nausea through me. A client meeting. Was that what she called it? A meeting to finalize the sale of her own children? The love you felt like a splash of acid. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My fingers wouldn't obey. Mr. Henderson's words were a drumbeat in my head, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of my pounding heart. Before sunrise. Before sunrise. Before sunrise. I walked into the kitchen, my legs unsteady, and leaned against the counter for support. I had to call someone. Not David, he was on that construction job up in Michigan, not due back for another 2 days. Calling him would send him into a helpless panic, make him drive through the night, and that was too dangerous. No, I needed someone calm. Someone practical. Someone who would believe me without question. My fingers, clumsy and stiff, dialed my best friend, Sarah. We'd been friends since our sons were in kindergarten together. She was a retired ER nurse, and if anyone knew how to handle a crisis without falling apart, it was her. Carol? Is everything okay? You sound out of breath, she answered, her voice immediately laced with concern. Sarah, I need a favor. Huge one. And you can't ask me why. Not yet. I whispered, my back pressed against the cool kitchen wall, my eyes darting towards the living room. Do you know anyone, a driver? Someone completely trustworthy who could take me and the kids on a long trip, right now, tonight, and not ask any questions? I'll pay anything. There was a pause on the other end, but not of disbelief. It was the sound of her practical, nurse's mind assessing the situation, triaging the emergency. Is it David? Is someone hurt? No, everyone's fine. Physically, I choked out. But we have to go. Now. She didn't push. That's the kind of friend she was. My nephew, Mike. He drives for a car service sometimes. He's a good kid, ex-military, keeps his mouth shut. I trust him with my life. Where are you going? Columbus. I blurted out, the name of the city just popping into my head. It was big enough to get lost in and far enough away to feel safe. For now. Okay, she said, her voice all business. I'll call him. He'll need cash. Can you manage that? Yes, I said, my mind racing to the emergency fund I kept in the old coffee can in the pantry. Give me 10 minutes, she said, and the line went dead. Those 10 minutes were the longest and most productive of my life. I moved like a woman possessed. I ran upstairs to the kids' room and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. My hands were shaking as I threw in clothes, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. Liam's favorite dinosaur pajamas. Emily's worn-out blue sweater that she called her comfy sweater. I grabbed handfuls of socks and underwear, jeans, t-shirts. I saw Emily's Raggedy Doll Patches lying on her pillow. She hadn't slept a single night without Patches since she was 2. I tucked the doll into the bag. I saw Liam's little red toy car on the nightstand. I grabbed that too. My mind was a frantic checklist. Toothbrushes? Jackets? Phone charger? I ran back downstairs and into the kitchen. I grabbed a loaf of bread, a package of cheese, 2 juice boxes, and a bag of apple slices. I stuffed it all into a reusable grocery bag. I had no idea where we were going or how long we'd be gone, but I wouldn't let my grandbabies go hungry. From the kitchen, I could see them in the living room, completely oblivious. Liam was making vroom vroom sounds with his little car, driving it over the arm of the sofa. Emily was carefully adding a yellow block to the top of their tower. Their laughter echoed in the quiet house. A sound so pure it was like a knife in my heart. A wave of doubt washed over me, a sickening lurch in my stomach. Was I overreacting? Was this all some horrible misunderstanding? Maybe the photo was a sick joke? Maybe the money was a lottery win she was hiding? Then the image of the red circles flashed in my mind again. Vicious. Deliberate. No. My gut, the primal instinct of a mother and a grandmother, was screaming at me. This was real. The danger was real. My phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah. Mike is on his way. Black sedan. He'll be at the corner of Oak and Elm in 5 minutes. He knows not to pull into the driveway. Be safe, Carol. Call me when you can. 5 minutes. I took a deep, shuddering breath and walked into the living room, forcing my face into a mask of cheerful excitement. I knelt on the floor beside them, my knees cracking. Guess what, you two? I said, my voice unnaturally bright. We're going on a secret nighttime adventure. Emily's eyes widened. An adventure? Now. But it's almost dinner time. That's what makes it a secret. I improvised, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. It's a surprise trip to a super fun place. But we have to leave right now to get there on time. So grab your jackets. Let's go, go, go. Liam started to grumble, rubbing his eyes. But I'm tired, Grandma. I pulled a small lollipop from my purse, an emergency bribe I always kept handy, and pressed it into his hand. There's more candy in the car, I whispered conspiratorially. His face lit up. I helped them into their coats, my fingers fumbling with the zippers. I grabbed the duffel bag and the food, took Emily by the hand, and scooped Liam up into my arms. He was getting heavy, but the adrenaline surging through me made him feel as light as a feather. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We walked out the back door into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. I hurried them along the sidewalk, half running towards the corner. A plain black sedan was waiting, its engine humming softly, its lights off. The driver, a young man with a kind, serious face, got out and opened the back door without a word. I buckled the kids in, my hands trembling so much it took me 3 tries to click Liam's seatbelt into place. Emily hugged her doll, her expression a mixture of confusion and excitement. Liam was already busy with his lollipop, oblivious. I slid in beside them, pulling the heavy duffel bag onto my lap like a shield. Columbus, I said to the driver, my voice raspy. The main bus station downtown. And please hurry. He just nodded and pulled away from the curb. A smooth, silent departure into the night. As I watched our house, our street, our entire life disappear into the darkness, a dark, terrifying thought crossed my mind. Were we running from Jessica? Or were we running right into a bigger trap she had laid for us? The highway was a hypnotic river of red and white lights flowing through an ocean of darkness. I held my sleeping grandchildren, their small bodies warm and heavy against me, and stared out at the black Ohio countryside rushing past. Liam had his head on my lap, his soft breaths fogging the cool window pane. Emily was curled up against my side, her doll patches tucked under her chin. They were safe for now in this moving metal shell, but the feeling was terrifyingly fragile. Every pair of headlights that appeared in the rearview mirror sent a fresh jolt of panic through me, a metallic taste of fear in my mouth. Was it her? Had she figured it out? Was she coming for us? The young driver Mike hadn't said a word since we left, and his silence was both a comfort and an eerie reminder of how strange our situation was. We arrived at the Columbus bus station just after 2 a.m. It was even worse than I could have imagined. It was a cold, desolate place, smelling of disinfectant, stale coffee, and a kind of lingering human despair. A few lost souls were scattered on the hard plastic chairs, sleeping with their mouths open or staring into space with hollow eyes. The bright, humming fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and unforgiving. I knew we couldn't stay there. We needed a real bed, a lock on the door, a place to hide. I gently woke the children, who were groggy and confused. "Are we at the fun place yet, Grandma?" Emily mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Almost, sweetie. Just one more little car ride." I lied, my heart aching with every false word. I found a taxi outside and gave the driver the name of the first cheap-looking motel I saw on my phone that was in the opposite direction of the bus station. The Royal Inn. The name was a cruel joke. The room was even grimmer than I'd imagined. The threadbare carpet was stained with things I didn't want to think about. The brown bedspread was thin and scratchy, and the air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and air freshener. But it had a heavy deadbolt and a chain lock on the door, and right then that was all that mattered. I paid the driver, locked the door behind us, and for the first time in hours, felt a tiny fractional release of the tension in my shoulders. I gently laid Emily and Liam on the one double bed. They were asleep again before their heads hit the lumpy pillows. I pulled the thin blanket over them and watched them sleep, their faces so peaceful, so unaware of the ugly world I had dragged them into. I sat in the single rickety chair by the window, the Ziploc bag still in my coat pocket, feeling its toxic weight. I didn't sleep. I just sat there watching the shadows cast by passing cars dance on the water-stained ceiling, listening to the roar of trucks on the nearby highway, and feeling a loneliness so profound it felt like I was drowning in an endless dark ocean. By morning, a crushing sense of hopelessness had settled over me. What was I doing? I had no plan. I had the emergency cash from the coffee can, but it wouldn't last long. I was a 68-year-old woman in a strange city with 2 small children, running from a monster I couldn't even begin to understand. For a brief, terrible moment, I thought about calling David and dumping this whole mess in his lap. But I couldn't. This was my burden to carry, at least until I knew what I was dealing with. I had to protect him too. Then a memory surfaced, a faint glimmer in the darkness of my mind. Years ago, when my Frank had his first health scare, we had been in Columbus for his treatment at the big university hospital. We were terrified, lost in the impersonal maze of the medical center. And a kind, old priest at a beautiful downtown church, St. Joseph's Cathedral, had sat with us in a small chapel. He prayed with us, brought us coffee, and gave us the strength to get through the worst week of our lives. His name was Father Michael. I hadn't thought of him in years, but now his name felt like a lifeline, the only one I had. I got the kids dressed, promising them the biggest pancakes they had ever seen if they were good. We found a small diner and watching them eat, their faces sticky with syrup and powdered sugar, gave me a sliver of normalcy. It was a fragile, beautiful illusion, and I clung to it with all my might. After breakfast, we walked to the old stone cathedral. Its twin spires reached for the sky, and the sound of the organ music drifting through the heavy wooden doors calmed my frayed nerves just a little. During the service, I prayed harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't pray for answers. I prayed for strength, for courage. After the Mass, I saw him near the altar, older and more stooped than I remembered. But his eyes were still just as kind and perceptive. I left the kids in the church nursery, where a kind-faced volunteer was reading them a story, and approached him. "Father Michael?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned and a look of recognition slowly dawned on his face. "Carol? Carol Miller? My goodness, it's been years. Frank's wife. How are you? And are those your grandchildren?" Tears I hadn't even realized I was holding back began to stream down my face, hot and fast. Father, I'm in trouble. Terrible, terrible trouble. He led me into a small, quiet office that smelled of old books and lemon polish. I sat down, my hands twisting in my lap, and the whole horrifying story came pouring out of me. The dry cleaners, the photo, the money, the escape in the night. I pulled out the Ziploc bag and laid its contents on his polished wooden desk. The photo of my grandchildren, desecrated by those red circles, seemed to scream in the silent, holy room. He listened without interrupting, his face growing graver with every word. He picked up the transfer receipt, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stared at the signature at the bottom for a long time. When he finally looked up, the kindness in his eyes was mixed with a steely seriousness. Carol, he said, his voice low and firm. The devil works in many ways, but this is the devil's own work. You were right to run. And you were right to come here. He paused, tapping a finger on the desk. I can't solve this for you. My prayers will protect you, but you need a warrior in this world. And I think I know one. He picked up his phone. There is a young woman in our parish. An attorney. She does a lot of pro bono work for families in crisis. She's sharp, she's tenacious, and she has a fire in her for justice. Her name is Rachel Dean. I want you to talk to her. An hour later, I was sitting in that same office, but this time a woman in her late 30s with a sharp blazer and even sharper eyes sat across from me. This was Rachel. She didn't have the comforting presence of the priest. She had the focused intensity of a predator who had just caught the scent of its prey. She listened to my story again, her expression unreadable. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her briefcase before carefully examining the contents of the Ziploc bag. She spent a long time looking at the bank transfer, typing numbers from it into her laptop. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. This routing number, it's from an offshore account in the Caymans, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Designed to be untraceable. She then focused on the signature at the bottom. Mark Thompson, she read aloud. She stopped typing and looked from the paper to Father Michael, then to me. A flicker of something, recognition, alarm, passed through her eyes. Rachel looked at the evidence with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, and after a long silence she said, Carol, I'm afraid this is far worse than a simple family problem. That name on the transfer. Mark Thompson. I've seen it before. You've seen it before? I asked, my voice a thin, reedy sound. Who is he? Rachel leaned forward, her professional composure a thin veil over a sudden, palpable urgency. He's not just some boyfriend with a fat wallet, Carol. Mark Thompson is a name that's come up on the periphery of a few high-level financial crime cases my firm has consulted on. He's a ghost. The FBI has a file on him, but it's thin. He specializes in creating shell corporations, moving dark money, making wealthy, powerful people's problems disappear. The fact that he's involved means this isn't just about your daughter-in-law wanting a new life. She picked up the photo of Emily and Liam, holding it carefully by the edges. Her gaze was intense. It's about why she needed $2 million from a man like that. A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than anything I'd felt before, settled in my chest. Rachel's next words confirmed my worst fears. I can start digging into Thompson, pull some strings, but if we want to get ahead of this, we need more. We need to know what Jessica's endgame was. Is there anything else? Any documents, computers, anything at the house that could give us a clue? My mind raced, flashing back to the silent, empty house. The house I had just fled. But then a memory sharp and painful pierced through the fog of my panic. It was from about 6 months ago. My son, David, had come over for dinner late one night, looking exhausted and defeated. He and Jessica had been fighting constantly, mostly about money. I just don't understand where it's all going, Mom, he'd said, slumping onto my kitchen chair and rubbing his temples. She has her own accounts now, says her freelance work is private, and I don't have a right to see it. She even changed the combination on our small home safe where we keep the important documents. Said I was being too controlling. He had looked at me, his eyes filled with a sad, misplaced loyalty, trying to defend her even as she hurt him. I saw her write the new combination down and hide the paper in her jewelry box. I know this is wrong, Mom, but I memorized it. He had looked so guilty. If anything ever happens to me, you need to be able to get our important papers, the kids' birth certificates, the deed to the house, their savings bonds. The combination is our wedding anniversary. May 12, 2018. May 12, 18. At the time I'd felt a pang of sorrow for the crack forming in his marriage. Now that memory felt like a key. A weapon. There's a safe, I told Rachel, my voice flat. In their bedroom. And I think I know the combination. Rachel's eyes lit up with a grim intensity. You need to go back, Carol. It's a risk, but it might be our only chance to get ahead of them. Call your friend. Make sure the kids are safe and out of the way. Go now before Jessica realizes you're not just at the local park. Leaving the kids again felt like tearing a piece of my own soul away. I dropped them off with Sarah, who lived about an hour outside Columbus. She hugged me tightly at the door. You look like you've been to hell and back, she whispered. I think that's where I'm going, I replied. The bus ride back to Maple Creek was torture. The world outside the window was bright and sunny, filled with people living normal lives, but inside the bus, my world was gray and terrifying. Every mile closer to that house felt like a mile closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. I let myself in through the back door with my spare key. The house was eerily silent, exactly as I had left it. Jessica's half-empty coffee mug was still on the counter, a lipstick stain on the rim. It was a ghost from a life that no longer existed. I went straight to their bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knelt on the plush carpet that I had helped them pick out and pulled the small, gray safe out from under the bed. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. My hands shook as I turned the dial. Right to 05. The little click sounded like a gunshot. Left past 05 to 12. Another click. Right to 18. I held my breath, my lungs burning, and pulled the handle. Click. The sound was deafening in the silence. The heavy little door swung open. And my world ended for the second time. It wasn't filled with documents. It was filled with cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled with paper bands. There had to be tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was the kind of money you only see in movies. Beside the cash was a stack of passports. I picked them up, my fingers feeling numb. The names were wrong: Maria Gonzalez, Sofia Morales, Catherine Dubois, but the pictures were of Jessica. Jessica with blonde hair. Jessica with short black hair. Jessica with glasses. They were fake identities. And then I saw the large manila envelope at the bottom, tucked beneath the money. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages as I pulled it out. Inside were 3 one-way, first-class airline tickets from Cleveland to Madrid, Spain. The departure date was for this coming Friday. The names on the tickets were Jessica Miller, Emily Miller, and Liam Miller. My son's name was not on them. A strangled sob escaped my lips, a raw, wounded sound. She was leaving him. She was taking my grandchildren and running away with this criminal. I rummaged deeper into the envelope, my desperate fingers searching for something, anything that would make this make sense. They closed around a photograph. It was Jessica, looking happier and more radiant than I had seen her in years, her arm linked with a handsome, smiling man in an expensive-looking suit. They were standing on a balcony overlooking a beautiful blue ocean. On the back, in Jessica's loopy handwriting, were 2 words. My Mark. Mark Thompson. I sank to the floor. The evidence of her betrayal scattered around me like shrapnel from an explosion. The money, the tickets, the photo, it was all there. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. She hadn't just been unhappy. She had been plotting. For months. Maybe years. Every smile, every love you, Mom. Every family dinner had been a lie, a performance. I grabbed all the evidence I could carry, my hands shaking with a toxic mixture of rage and grief. I had to get out of there before she came back, before she called and I wasn't there to answer. But just as I was about to leave, my eyes fell on the small wastebasket next to her desk. I saw the corner of a formal-looking envelope, torn into several pieces. On one piece, I could see the logo of what looked like an official agency, something to do with adoptions or legal services. My gut twisted. Why would she have papers from an adoption agency? She wasn't adopting. Driven by a desperate, sickening curiosity, I reached in and pulled out the shredded pieces. I knelt on the floor and smoothed them out on the rug, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. It took me a minute to piece them together. like the world's most horrifying puzzle. They were fragments of a legal document, filled with dense, official-looking text. And the words I could make out made the blood run cold in my veins. Guardianship relinquishment. Private international arrangement. Finalization fee. And then I saw the names of my grandchildren, Emily Miller and Liam Miller, typed out in cold black unforgiving ink. I stood there frozen, the torn pieces of paper laid out on the bedroom rug like a coroner's report. Guardianship relinquishment. International arrangement. The words didn't make sense, but they made a horrible, sickening kind of sense all at the same time. This wasn't just about her running away with the kids. This wasn't about a new life in Spain with a rich boyfriend. This was something else. Something darker. Something transactional. I carefully gathered the shredded pieces, along with the cash, the fake passports, and the plane tickets, stuffing them all into a tote bag I found in her closet. It was a designer bag, one I'd never seen before. Of course it was. I fled that house like it was on fire, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. My mind was screaming, a high-pitched keen of pure terror. The drive back to Columbus was a numb haze. I clutched the tote bag to my chest, its contents feeling radioactive, a cancer that had been growing in the heart of my family. When I burst into Rachel's small law office, I must have looked like a wild animal. Her receptionist gasped. I didn't even say hello. I just walked straight into Rachel's office and appended the bag onto her conference table. The cash, the passports, the tickets, and the pieced-together documents spilled out in a damning sordid pile. Rachel's eyes widened, first at the sheer volume of cash, then at the stack of fake passports. She once again pulled on her gloves and began to examine the new evidence, her movements quick and precise. She picked up the photo of Jessica and Mark. "So this is him," she said, her voice tight. "Living the high life while my client's son works himself to the bone." She spent a long time looking at the shredded document, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line, her expression growing colder and harder by the second. After several minutes of tense silence, she looked up at me, and the look in her eyes terrified me more than anything I had seen yet. "Carol," she said, her voice low and grave, "this has just gone far beyond fraud and a custody dispute. This document, it's a preliminary agreement to relinquish parental rights in exchange for a fee. But it's not a legal adoption. This is the paperwork of the black market. These are the kinds of documents used when a wealthy, childless couple overseas wants to privately acquire a child. No questions asked." She stood up and began to pace the length of her office, a caged tiger. A $2 million transfer, fake passports, international flights, and a document like this. I need to make a call. This is no longer my field. This is federal. Within an hour, 2 men in crisp, dark suits were sitting in Rachel's office. They introduced themselves as agents from the FBI, from the Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Unit. The words made my stomach clench. They didn't smile. They listened intently as I recounted my story for what felt like the 100th time. Their faces impassive, their eyes missing nothing. They took custody of all the evidence, cataloging each item with a chilling professionalism that made the nightmare feel starkly, terrifyingly real. One of the agents, a man named Davis who seemed to be in charge, picked up the original photo of Emily and Liam, the one with the red circles. He held it up to the light, studying it for a long time. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, a voice that had clearly seen the worst of humanity. "These circles. Did your daughter-in-law draw them?" I assume so," I stammered. "They were found in her coat pocket." Agent Davis exchanged a look with his partner, a silent, knowing communication that made my skin crawl. He then turned to me, and his voice softened just a fraction, the kind of softness a doctor uses before delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mrs. Miller, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. This isn't a personal threat. It's not just an angry scribble from a disturbed mother." He paused, and I held my breath, bracing myself for a blow I couldn't even imagine. "In the world we investigate," he continued slowly, his words like clinical sterile needles, "a symbol like this, a red circle drawn on a child's photo, has a very specific meaning. It's a marker, a designation. It's used by international trafficking rings." The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Trafficking. It was a word from the news, from terrifying movies. It had nothing to do with my life, with my sweet grandchildren who loved pancakes and dinosaur pajamas. I don't understand, I whispered, my throat suddenly dry as dust. My mind simply refused to process the words to connect them to my family. It means the asset has been identified, vetted, and is ready for transfer, the agent said, his words brutal in their clarity. The child is no longer a person. They are a product. Mrs. Miller, your daughter-in-law wasn't planning to run away with your grandchildren to start a new life. She was planning to deliver them to a buyer. The room tilted. The agent's voice seemed to come from a great distance. My mind fractured. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. Sell them? Sell Emily and Liam? Like they were a car or a piece of furniture. The horror of it was so absolute, so monstrous that it was beyond comprehension. My baby's babies. My son's children. Her own flesh and blood. I must have made some kind of sound, a choked, strangled gasp, because Rachel was suddenly by my side, her hand gripping my arm, grounding me. The other agent, who had been working on one of the burner phones I'd found in the safe, turned his laptop screen towards Agent Davis. I've got something, he said. The SIM card was wiped, but I recovered a deleted text chain from the cache. Between a phone registered to Jessica Miller and this burner, listed under MT. Agent Davis turned the laptop screen towards me. My eyes blurred with tears, but I forced myself to focus. I had to see. I had to know. And there, in cold blue and white text bubbles, was the death sentence of the woman I once knew. Jessica. The package is secured. Both items. Healthy and ready for delivery on Friday. MT. Payment confirmed upon receipt. The client is anxious. No mistakes this time, Jessica. Jessica, don't worry. The assets are ready for transport. The buyer is confirmed. Just get me the rest of the money. Assets. Package. Items. Merchandise. Every synonym for my grandchildren was another stab in my heart. She wasn't their mother. She was their broker. In that moment, the woman I had once loved like a daughter died. I grieved her for a full 10 seconds. And then in her place, a cold, hard resolve began to form. The grief was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard fury. She wasn't just a bad wife or a greedy woman. She was a monster. And I was the grandmother. And monsters, I decided right then and there, needed to be hunted. We need your help, Carol. Agent Davis's voice cut through the thick fog of my newfound rage. I looked up, my vision clearing, the tears drying on my face. Help? How could I help? I felt like a fragile piece of glass that had just been shattered. But the pieces were coming back together. Not as a delicate vase, but as a sharp, jagged weapon. What do you need me to do? I asked, and I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Jessica and Mark think they have until Friday, he explained, his tone shifting from clinical to strategic. He was speaking to me now not as a grieving grandmother, but as an asset. They think the children are still with you in Maple Creek, safe and sound. They think you are still the clueless old woman they've been manipulating for years. That gives us an advantage. We need to force their hand. Make them panic. Make them make a mistake. The plan they laid out was both brilliant and terrifying. They wanted me to call Jessica. Not to confront her, but to play a part. I was to be a frantic, hysterical grandmother who had taken the kids to a park in Columbus for a day trip. A plausible excuse, and had lost them. You took them to Columbus? Rachel asked, clarifying for me, her brow furrowed. Why would you do that? Tell her you wanted to give them a treat. A day at the big city zoo. To cheer them up because their mom was working so much. Davis supplied, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Make it believable. Frame it as you trying to be a good grandmother. Then you tell her you turned your back for 1 second and they were gone. The thought of saying those words, of pretending my worst nightmare had come true, made me feel physically ill. But looking at the cold, hard faces of the agents and thinking of Emily and Liam, safe for now with Sarah but still the subject of a monstrous transaction, I knew I had no choice. I would walk through fire for those children. I could make 1 phone call. They set it up in a small windowless room at their field office. Felt like a movie set. My phone was connected to a recording device. Agent Davis sat across from me, his eyes watchful, ready to coach me if I faltered. I took a deep, shaky breath, the number already dialed. I thought of all the times Jessica had patronized me, treated me like I was senile, a piece of old furniture. I channeled all of that frustration, all of that hurt, and all of my terror for my grandchildren into my voice. I had to give the performance of a lifetime. It rang twice. Hello. Jessica's voice was smooth, confident, laced with a false sweetness that now curdled my stomach. The voice of a woman who thought she was in complete control of her universe. Jessica! I cried, forcing a sob into my voice, a sound torn from the deepest parts of me. I let my voice crack and tremble. Oh God, Jessica! Something terrible has happened. Mom? Is that you? What is it? Calm down, I can barely understand you, she said, an immediate hint of annoyance in her tone, as if my panic was an inconvenience. It's the kids. It's Emily and Liam. I wailed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I brought them to Columbus, to the zoo. I just wanted to do something nice for them. You've been working so hard. And I looked away for just a second, Jessica. Just 1 second to buy them some popcorn, and they were gone. I can't find them anywhere. I've been screaming their names. The police are here, but they're gone. They're gone. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. For a moment I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard her sharp, shocked intake of breath. When she spoke again, her voice was a high-pitched shriek of what sounded, to any normal person, like pure maternal terror. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her that. What do you mean they're gone? How could you lose them? They were your responsibility. I trusted you with them. Have you called the police? Yes, they're here now, but there are so many people. I cried, letting real tears of anger and grief mix with the fake ones of panic. I don't know what to do. Stay right there. Don't move. I'm on my way, she yelled, and the line went dead. Agent Davis gave me a grim, approving nod. Perfect, he said. The hook is in. Now we wait for her to call the real person she's worried about. We didn't have to wait long. Within 5 minutes, the tech agent in the corner, a young man who looked like he should be in college, held up a hand. She's on the phone with Mark Thompson, he said, and flicked a switch. Jessica's voice, now stripped of any fake concern and filled with pure venomous panic, flooded the small room through a speaker. Mark, we have a problem. A huge problem. The old woman took them to Columbus and lost them. They're gone. Mark's voice was a low, angry growl. What do you mean lost them? How does someone lose 2 kids? Is she incompetent, or is this something else? I don't know, she shrieked, her voice thin and ragged with fury. She's an incompetent old fool. That's what she is. I told you we should have handled this differently. My $2 million payday is gone. Our entire plan is ruined. The buyer is landing tomorrow. What are we going to tell him? Shut up and think, he snapped back at her. Stop screeching. A frantic grandmother, 2 missing kids. It'll be all over the news in an hour. We can't go anywhere near Columbus. It's too hot. Then Jessica's voice dropped, turning icy and cruel. I heard her say words that will haunt me until the day I die. It's all her fault. That stupid, meddling old woman. I should have dealt with her weeks ago. Found a way to put her in a home. She paused, and her next words were filled with such malice that it made my skin crawl. Maybe I still can. She's the one who was with them last. If the police start asking questions, maybe I can make them see that the confused old grandma who's been having memory problems lately is the real one to blame. A tragic accident. An old woman who wandered off with her grandkids and got them lost. Maybe she's not fit to have custody anymore. I gasped. She was going to frame me. She was going to paint me as senile, as a danger to my own grandchildren, to save her own skin. Agent Davis looked at me, his eyes dark. She's unraveling. And she's giving us everything we need. Then Jessica's voice came through the speaker again. This time filled with a new desperate idea. The sound of a cornered animal. Wait. Mark. The buyer. He has connections, right? Powerful people. Maybe he can help us find them. We tell him the merchandise was stolen. And if he helps us get it back, we'll give him a discount. A finder's fee. I felt a wave of nausea. She was trying to sick even more criminals on her own children, to put out an all-points bulletin for them in the criminal underworld. The tech agent suddenly typed furiously on his keyboard. They just sent a text, he said, to a new number. Encrypted. He worked for a moment, his fingers flying, and then the message appeared on the large monitor on the wall. It was from Mark to someone labeled the handler. Contingency. Merchandise compromised. Grandparent interference. Need to arrange a meeting with the intermediary to renegotiate. Tonight. Same place as before. Urgent. The seller is becoming unstable. Agent Davis stood up, a grim, tight smile on his face. And there it is, he said, his voice low and dangerous. They're walking right into our trap. The same place as before, according to the FBI's intelligence, was a rundown motel off I-71 called the Starlight Inn, a place known for its no questions asked policy and hourly rates. It was the perfect location for the kind of sordid business Jessica and Mark were involved in, a place where people went to disappear. As dusk settled over the city, casting long, dreary shadows across the highway, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of a dark, unmarked van. It was a mobile command unit, parked in the shadowy back lot of a closed-down diner across the highway from the motel. The van was filled with monitors showing different camera angles, radios crackling with coded language, and the low hum of technology. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a kind of focused, predatory tension. Rachel sat beside me, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm, though I could feel a slight tremor in her fingers. Agent Davis was in the front, a headset on, speaking in low, clipped tones into a microphone. All teams in position, he murmured. Alpha team, you have the west exit. Bravo, rear fire escape. Charlie, you're on the roof of the adjacent building with optics. No one moves until they are both inside room 112. The intermediary is one of ours, Agent Klein. He's wired for sound and video. Repeat, do not move until the target is secure, and the briefcase is open. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I felt strangely disconnected from my own body, like I was watching a scene from a television show. But the fear was real, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. Through a pair of high-powered binoculars, I could see the motel's flickering neon sign. SN. The R and I long since burned out. Each car that pulled into the lot made me jump, my hands instantly clammy. You're doing great, Carol, Rachel whispered, giving my arm a gentle squeeze. This all happened because of you. Because you were brave. You saved them. I shook my head, my eyes still glued to the motel. It's not over yet, I whispered back. An hour crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. Then another. The agents in the van were preternaturally calm, a stark contrast to my own frayed nerves. Then, just after 10 p.m., a sleek black car, a BMW far too expensive for this neighborhood, pulled into the motel lot and parked in a dark corner. My breath caught in my throat. The passenger door opened and Jessica stepped out. Even in the dim, grainy view from the binoculars, I could see the frantic, hunted look on her face. She was wearing a trench coat, though the night wasn't cold, and kept clutching it closed. Mark got out from the driver's side, constantly scanning the area, his head on a swivel, his body coiled with a nervous energy that was palpable even from across the highway. They looked like cornered rats, sniffing the air for the scent of the trap. They hurried towards a room on the ground floor, room 112. A single light was on inside, casting a sickly yellow glow through the drawn curtains. Targets are approaching the door, a voice crackled through the radio. Stand by. I watched them knock a sharp, quick rap. The door opened a crack, and they slipped inside, disappearing from view. They're in, Agent Davis said into his headset, his voice calm and steady. Intermediary has confirmed visual ID. They have a briefcase with them. They look agitated. He paused, listening to his earpiece. All right, teams. On my signal. He flicked a switch on the console in front of us, and suddenly the sound from inside room 112 filled our van. The audio was crystal clear. Don't understand what happened, Jessica's voice whined high and thin. She was supposed to be watching them. The old woman is losing her mind, I swear it. Enough, a calm, unfamiliar voice said. The undercover agent, Klein. His voice was cool and professional. Mr. Thompson. My client is extremely displeased. He flew halfway around the world for a delivery. Instead, he gets a story about a careless grandmother and a product that has vanished. He is not a patient man. It's a temporary setback, a logistical hiccup, Mark blustered, his voice tight with false confidence. We can get them back. We have feelers out. We just need a little more time. Maybe some resources from your client to expedite the search. My client doesn't pay for excuses, Agent Klein said coolly. He pays for results. Now, about the down payment he wired to you. He wants it back. All of it. Now, wait a minute. Jessica screeched. That money is ours. We did our part. Your part was to deliver the merchandise. The agent's voice was like ice. You failed. Open the briefcase. I'm here to collect. It was at that moment that Agent Davis spoke quietly into his headset, his voice devoid of all emotion. Go. What happened next was a blur of coordinated violent chaos. From our vantage point, I saw dark armored figures materialize from the shadows, moving with a silent, deadly speed that was terrifying to behold. The doors to the rooms on either side of 112 burst open. The sound came a split second later, a loud, concussive bang as a battering ram smashed the door of room 112 off its hinges. Through the speaker I heard a scream, a high, terrified shriek from Jessica that was cut short. FBI! Hands in the air! Get on the ground! Now! The shouted commands were deafening. There was the sound of scuffling, a table overturning with a crash, and Mark yelling, "It's a setup! A setup!" Then the sharp, authoritative voice of an agent. Hands behind your back. Don't resist. I heard the distinct metallic click-click of handcuffs being ratcheted tight. Jessica started sobbing hysterically, a pathetic, wailing sound. No, you don't understand. I'm a victim here. He made me do it. I'm the mother. I was looking for my children. You have to help me. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. An agent's flat, weary voice cut through her fake tears. I strongly suggest you use it. I leaned my forehead against the cold window of the van, and the strength that had carried me for the past few days, the adrenaline and the rage, finally drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. Hot tears streamed down my face. Tears of relief, of grief, of sheer bone-deep exhaustion. They were caught. Emily and Liam were safe. It was over. Rachel wrapped her arm around me, holding me tight. They got them, Carol, she said softly, her own voice thick with emotion. They got them. You did it. The motel parking lot was now flooded with the flashing red and blue lights of police cars that seemed to appear out of nowhere, bathing the sordid scene in a chaotic, strobing light. I watched as they led a weeping Jessica and a stony-faced, defeated Mark out in handcuffs and put them into separate cars. Even from across the highway in the swirling lights, I could see the look of pure, unadulterated hatred Jessica shot into the darkness, as if she knew somehow that I was watching. It was over. They were caught. But as I sat there, listening to the sirens wail and finally fade into the night, I knew another, more painful battle was about to begin. Telling my son that the woman he loved, the mother of his children, had tried to sell them for a briefcase full of cash. The weeks that followed were a surreal blur of sterile legal offices, hushed conversations, and quiet, agonizing waiting. The FBI had built an ironclad case. The evidence from the safe, the cash, the fake passports, the tickets to Madrid, combined with the shredded documents, the recorded phone calls, and the video and audio testimony of the undercover agent who posed as the buyer's intermediary, created a narrative so damning it was impossible to refute. Jessica and Mark, in their desperation, tried to turn on each other. Her lawyer painted her as a naive woman manipulated by a master criminal. His lawyer painted him as a man led astray by a greedy, unnatural mother. But the evidence, particularly their own words on the recordings, merchandise, assets, the buyer, made their claims of victimhood laughable. The trial itself was mercifully short. I had to testify, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my 68 years. I had to sit in a witness box, under the cold gaze of a courtroom full of strangers, and under oath detail every lie, every act of betrayal. Jessica's defense attorney tried to paint me as a confused, meddling mother-in-law, a woman bitter about her son's choice of a wife. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Miller," he'd asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "that you never approved of Jessica's modern career? That you thought her salary was something to be suspicious of?" I looked him square in the eye. "I was suspicious of the lies," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Not the money." When I recounted the story of the red circles on the photograph, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. I looked at Jessica then, sitting at the defendant's table. I didn't see a monster. I saw a hollowed-out shell of the girl my son had once loved, Her face pale and her eyes empty and dull. She refused to look at me. She just stared at her hands cuffed in her lap. They were both found guilty on multiple federal charges, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping and wire fraud. The judge, a stern-faced woman who looked at them with undisguised contempt, delivered the sentence without ceremony. "The act of placing a monetary value on one's own children," she said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "is a betrayal so profound it defies comprehension." She sentenced them to decades in a federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Justice was served, but it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt empty. A gaping wound had been cauterized, but the scar would remain forever. The real trial for me came 2 days after the verdict. David came home. I met him at the door of the small temporary apartment Rachel had helped me rent in Columbus. When I saw him, my heart broke all over again. He was so much thinner, his face gaunt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with his travel bag. He had been following the news, of course. He knew the headlines, but he didn't know the story. Not my story. He dropped his bag and hugged me tightly, a desperate, clinging embrace. Then he immediately knelt to scoop up Emily and Liam, who had run to him screaming, "Daddy!" He buried his face in their hair, and for a long moment, he just held them, his body shaking with silent sobs that he tried to hide from them. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, worn out from the excitement of their father's return, we sat at the small kitchen table. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words, with a grief too large to name. I made him a cup of tea, my hands unsteady. "I need to know, Mom," he said finally, his voice hoarse, raw. "I need you to tell me everything. The news, they don't tell you anything. I need to hear it from you. From the beginning." And so, I told him. I started with the trip to the dry cleaners on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I told him about Mr. Henderson's warning about the Ziploc bag, the $2 million bank transfer, the horrifying photo with the red circles. I watched my son's face crumble as I spoke, his confident posture collapsing inward until he was just a heartbroken man hunched over a cup of tea. I told him about the escape in the night, the fear, the loneliness, the seedy motel. I told him about the safe, about the fake passports, the plane tickets with his name so cruelly, deliberately absent. I told him about the shredded papers, about the FBI, about the words they used on the phone calls, assets, merchandise, package. With each new detail, a piece of him seemed to die. He sat there, staring at his hands on the table, his knuckles white. He didn't interrupt. He just absorbed every painful blow. When I finally finished, my throat raw from talking, the first light of dawn was filtering through the kitchen window, casting long gray shadows on the floor. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "I knew," he whispered, his voice cracking with shame. "Not this. Not selling them. My God." He shook his head, a gesture of profound disbelief. "But I knew something was wrong. The money, she was spending thousands of dollars, Mom. I'd ask her about it, and she'd just smile and say her marketing business was taking off. She'd get angry, say I didn't support her, that I didn't believe in her ambition, that I was trying to hold her back with my small-town thinking." He stood up and began to pace the small kitchen, a caged animal, running his hands through his disheveled hair. She would hide her phone. She would have these hushed conversations in the other room, and if I walked in, she'd hang up. I would ask who it was, and she would say it was a client, a demanding client from overseas. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe her so badly. It was easier than believing my wife was lying to my face every single day. He stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, his back to me. "I was a coward," he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I was a damn coward. I saw the signs and I ignored them because I was afraid of a fight. I was afraid of what it would mean for the kids. And because I was a coward, I let this happen to them. I didn't protect them." "No, David," I said, getting up and putting my arms around his shaking shoulders. "You are not a coward. You were a husband who wanted to believe in his wife. She manipulated you. She is a master manipulator. She manipulated all of us." He turned and hugged me back, and finally the dam broke. He wept like a little boy, his body racked with grief and guilt and a rage that had nowhere to go. I held him, my own tears soaking the shoulder of his shirt, and we stood there in the quiet kitchen, a mother and son, two survivors of a shipwreck we never saw coming. After a long time he pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at me, a new hard resolve forming in his gaze, like steel being forged in a fire. "I'm filing for an immediate divorce," he said, his voice firm, clear. "And I'm filing for sole custody. She will never ever see them again. She has forfeited the right to be their mother. She will not hurt them anymore." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain I had never seen before, but also with a glimmer of the strong man I knew him to be, and said, "Mom, I was a fool. How do we even begin to fix this for Emily and Liam?" That question hung in the air between us, heavy and daunting. How do you fix something so fundamentally broken? How do you explain to two small children that their mother isn't just gone, but that she never truly existed in the way they believed? The answer was one day at a time, one painful, deliberate step after another. David was true to his word. The very next day he hired the best family lawyer in Columbus. The divorce and custody proceedings were, given Jessica's criminal conviction, a swift and brutal formality. The judge granted David sole, permanent custody and terminated Jessica's parental rights completely, a rare and extreme measure reserved for the worst cases. The legal battle was over. The emotional one was just beginning. David quit his job in Maple Creek without a second thought, taking a position with a construction firm in Columbus that paid less but allowed him to be home every night by 5. We pooled our resources, my small pension, his savings, what little was left after Jessica had bled their accounts dry, and rented a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet, leafy suburb. It wasn't much, but it had a small backyard with a swing set and a big oak tree, and for the first time in months it felt like we could breathe. The first few months were the hardest. The house was too quiet, filled with a fragile, sorrowful energy. David walked around like a ghost in his own life, a man going through the motions of work and fatherhood, but the light in his eyes was gone. He'd sit at the kitchen table late at night, long after the kids were asleep, staring at a stack of bills, the lines on his face deepening. Emily, who had always been such a bubbly, chatty little girl, became withdrawn and quiet. She would spend hours in her room just drawing pictures, all of them in dark, somber colors. Liam, too young to understand what had happened, just knew that his world had been turned upside down. He started having nightmares and would wake up screaming for a mother who was never coming back. He became clingy, shadowing my every move, as if he was afraid I might disappear too. We told them a carefully curated version of the truth. We sat them down in the new living room surrounded by unpacked boxes, and told them that Mommy had done something very wrong, something that broke the rules for grown-ups, and that she had to go away for a very, very long time to think about it and get better. We answered their questions with simple, honest, as possible answers, but we shielded them from the monstrous reality of what she had tried to do. It was a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound, and we knew it. The real world, however, wasn't so kind. The story of the trafficking mom from Maple Creek had been in the state news, and in a world of internet searches and playground gossip, secrets are hard to keep. The devastating blow came one afternoon about 3 months after we had moved. Emily came home from her new school, her face pale and streaked with tears, her little unicorn backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. She wouldn't talk at first. She just ran to her room and slammed the door. Later that evening, after she refused to come down for dinner, I found her sitting on her bed, tearing one of her beautiful drawings into tiny, angry pieces. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked, my heart aching as I sat beside her on the bed. "You can tell Grandma. A boy at school," she whispered, her voice choked with a shame that no 7-year-old should ever have to feel. "His name is Billy. He said his mommy and daddy were talking about it. He said my mommy is a bad lady. He said she's in jail because she tried to give us away." The innocence of her words, "give us away," was more gut-wrenching than any legal term. It was a child's understanding of the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate rejection. I pulled her into my arms, my own heart shattering into 1,000 pieces all over again. How could another parent be so cruel, so careless, as to share such a toxic story where a child could overhear? I held her while she cried, great, heaving sobs that shook her small body. I rocked her back and forth, whispering that it wasn't her fault, that she was loved, that she was safe, That Billy was a stupid little boy who didn't know anything. That night, David and I knew the simple explanation was no longer enough. We had to arm them with a better truth. He sat both kids down on the living room sofa, one on each side of him, his arms wrapped around their shoulders. I sat in the armchair opposite, my hands clenched in my lap, praying I wouldn't break down. "Emily, Liam," he began, his voice thick with emotion but steady. "You know that Mommy is away. And what that boy said at school today, some of it was true in a way that's very confusing for grown-ups and even more confusing for kids. Mommy got very, very sick in her heart. She got tangled up with a very bad man, and they made some terrible, awful choices." He looked at them, his eyes pleading for them to understand something that was impossible to understand. "But I need you to know, and I need you to hear this from me, none of it was your fault. You are good, and you are wonderful, and you are the best things that have ever happened to me. And Grandma and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And we will always be here to keep you safe. No matter what." It was the hardest conversation of our lives, watching their young minds try to grapple with a concept that most adults couldn't fathom. There were more tears, more questions we couldn't fully answer. "Will we ever see her again?" Emily asked in a small voice. "I don't think so, sweetie," David said honestly. "But you have us. You will always have us." That night, after the kids were finally asleep, David sat beside me on the sofa in the dark. He looked exhausted, but something in his eyes had shifted. The hollow, haunted look was replaced by a quiet determination. He had faced the worst and he was still standing. He was a father. He was their rock. "I called my old financial advisor today," he said quietly. "I'm rolling over what's left of my retirement funds. I'm starting a new college fund for each of them. Everything she took, everything she planned to take. I'm going to earn it all back. I'll make sure they have a future she can never touch." It was the hardest conversation of our lives, but that night, for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the old David return, the fighter I knew he was. We were broken, but maybe, just maybe, we weren't beyond repair. Time, as it does, kept moving forward, not with a great rush, but with the slow, steady rhythm of changing seasons. Slowly, painstakingly, one day at a time, we began to build a new life on the ruins of the old one. Our little rental house in that quiet Columbus suburb started to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. The quiet, sad energy that had haunted its rooms was gradually replaced by the normal, chaotic, beautiful sounds of a family. The slam of the screen door after school, the cheerful noise of cartoons on a Saturday morning, the smell of my baking or David cooking spaghetti on a Wednesday night. David threw himself into his work and his children with a fierce, protective love that was beautiful and heartbreaking to watch. He was there for every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer practice. I watched him teach Liam how to ride a bike in the backyard, running alongside the wobbling bicycle, his patient voice carrying on the afternoon breeze. "You got it, buddy. Keep pedaling. I won't let go." He helped Emily with her multiplication tables at the kitchen table every night, his big, callous contractor's hands patiently guiding her small ones. He was both mother and father now, and in shouldering that double burden, he became more of a man than he had ever been. I slipped into my role as the full-time grandmother, the steady anchor in their new world. I was the keeper of stories, the baker of cookies, the chief boo-boo kisser, the one they ran to with scraped knees and happy news. I watched them start to heal in the way that only children can. The nightmares became less frequent. The sad questions about their mother were slowly replaced by excited chatter about friends, school projects, and what they wanted for their birthdays. They were resilient, these children. They were survivors. More resilient than I ever could have imagined. One sunny afternoon in late spring, about a year after the trial, we were all at the local park. David was pushing Liam on the swings higher and higher, the little boy's delighted squeals echoing through the air, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Emily and I were sitting on a bench, sharing a bag of salty popcorn. She had a sketchbook open on her lap and was drawing with intense concentration, her tongue once again sticking out from the corner of her mouth, just like her brother's. "What are you drawing, sweet pea?" I asked, peering over her shoulder. She turned the sketchbook towards me. It was a picture of a little house with a big smiling sun above it. In front of the house stood 3 figures holding hands. A tall man with brown hair, a small boy holding a red ball, and a woman with curly gray hair. Our family. It's us, she said simply, with the profound clarity of an 8-year-old. It's our home. I looked at the drawing, at the simple, perfect world she had created on the page, and my eyes filled with tears. There was an absence in the picture, a ghost that would always linger at the edges of our lives. I knew that one day when they were older we would have to tell them the full, ugly truth. It was a conversation I dreaded, another mountain we would have to climb together. But for now this was enough. Her drawing was our truth. We were a family, whole and strong in our brokenness, held together by a love that had been tested by fire and had not burned away. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I can hear the soft, even breathing of my grandchildren in their sleep from the next room, I think of Jessica. I don't feel anger anymore. Not the hot, burning rage I felt in the beginning. Now it's just a profound, hollow sadness. A sadness for the woman she could have been. For the family she threw away for a briefcase of cash and a monster's empty promises. I see her face in my mind, not the hollow-eyed stranger in the courtroom, but the smiling, nervous girl who first came to my house for dinner all those years ago. The betrayal still stings, a scar on my heart that will never fully fade. I think of my dear Frank, and I am so grateful he was not here to see it. The grief of his funeral was clean, pure. This was a different kind of grief, a dirty, complicated sorrow for a loss that felt like a slow poisoning. But then I hear Liam laugh in his sleep, or I find one of Emily's drawings left for me on the kitchen table, and I am reminded of what I fought for. I am reminded of what we saved. My story is a hard one, but it's a story of survival. It's a warning that sometimes the greatest danger comes dressed as family, smiling from across the dinner table. It taught me that a woman's instinct, a grandmother's love, is the most powerful, ferocious force on this earth. We have to trust that instinct, even when it tells us something we don't want to believe, especially then. We have to fight for our families, even if it means tearing them apart to save the very heart of them. Thank you for listening to my story all the way to the end. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of speaking our truth and knowing we are not alone. Have you ever had to trust your gut feeling about someone, a deep-down instinct that something was terribly wrong, even when everyone else thought you were overreacting? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories give strength to all of us. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength.